Paul Austin and I are about to explain to people why all the myths about psychedelic medicine are false. And so we want to convince everybody, and we've got some of our folks here that we brought. We want to dispel some of the myths about psychedelics. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to start with one interesting myth about psychedelics that I hear a lot is people say, why, when you say psychedelics are illegal, that the FDA is not allowing psychedelics, a lot of times people will say, well, that's because psychedelics haven't been proven to be safe yet, and so they're just not comfortable yet making psychedelics legal. And the reason I'm calling bullshit on that is because Schedule 1, which the psychedelics are on, the definition of a Schedule 1 drug is that it has no medical benefit and it's highly addictive. And so, as we know, psychedelics are completely non-addictive. They have huge medical benefits. And we say that to people and they say, yeah, but maybe the FDA just doesn't have enough information yet. And so the reason I call bullshit on this is, if that's the case, why aren't cigarettes on Schedule 1? They're killing millions of people, they're highly addictive, and somehow they're not on Schedule 1. So if that's the case, I'm saying the whole thing is politically corrupt, and we have to acknowledge this post-pandemic and say, hey, we have to reach back for some things that maybe we've overlooked over the decades. And so this is Paul Austin from Third Wave. I'm Zappy, but this is the person you want to go to get all information on psychedelics. So what myth would you bust right here?
Well, I think this myth that we need the FDA to approve psychedelics to be able to utilize them. If you look at the Netherlands has legal psilocybin. They've had it for 40 or 50 years. It's incredibly safe. They've had very few, if any, issues with it. And so I think this notion of psychedelics are medical is one of the biggest myths that's out there. We've been using psychedelics for 5,000, 10,000 years. I don't think we need the permission of a sort of industrial organization to give us the permission to use these medicines that grow in the ground. They grow in nature. So I think this whole notion that these are only medical, these can only be used for depression is very much it's a false narrative. That these help us with our spiritual lives, that these help us become more creative, they help us be better lovers, that we don't need them to be purely in a medical box in order to be useful. That in fact they're, I would argue, less useful if they are medicalized, that we as the people deserve to have access to these unfettered.
Yes.
That we have the capacity, we have the ability, the literacy to be able to utilize this. And that's why I love microdosing, because I think microdosing gives us a chance to work with these bit by bit to build and develop a relationship with them so we can learn how they could work in the long term for us.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that is a great point. I think right now, cannabis, marijuana, there's 50 million people a day violating federal law. We have to see these psychedelics in the same light. And so for me, I think, we have to grab back our rights right now. One of the other psychedelics myths that I think is, particularly offensive is, people who are, basically, let me actually say this before I get to the myth. It's been found out here, and we're telling this information in real time, that most of the prohibition that happened in the United States with psychedelics was actually perpetuated by the alcohol companies. And so the alcohol companies are actually the ones that knew that there would be a day like this that would come, like 2024, where more people would start to be taking, psychedelics and microdosing and smoking marijuana, and that their business would be down dramatically. So here's that day, it's come, but for the last 50 years, they've been seeding, you're going to get brain damage, you're going to jump out of a roof. And so when you follow the money, it wasn't really pharma, it was really the alcohol companies. And so, the big myth is that the pharmaceutical companies are going to suppress psychedelics even further. And that is not the case, thankfully, for one reason, and that is the only industry that's really bigger and more powerful than the pharmaceutical industry is the health insurance industry. And these health providers like United Healthcare, Kaiser, these are the guys who are buying the pharmaceuticals, and they're sick and tired of it. So Paul and I know people that are doing studies on behalf of the pharmaceutical, or rather on behalf of the healthcare companies, because the healthcare companies have told the pharmaceutical companies, hey, we know ketamine might be effective, we know mushrooms might be effective, we're not going to wait around. We want these things now. It's too expensive to have people coming into an emergency room on a Saturday night having a panic attack. It costs us too much. If there's value in these mushrooms, then we want it right now. And they're forcing the pharmaceuticals, who a lot of people lastly would say, hey, we don't need the pharmaceutical companies, get rid of them. I say no. I say the pharmaceutical companies, we kind of need them. We need them because they do make some good drugs for a lot of ailments, but they also have the distribution that we're going to need for psilocybin mushroom microdosing to penetrate society in order that we don't go off the cliff right now.
And I think good point. Woo-woo. We'll woo-woo that. I think another great point is that psychedelics aren't just about getting high. This is what I hear a lot about, that people who are maybe long-term meditators or maybe quite new to these substances think, oh, this is just another way to disassociate. It's just another way to get high. It's just another way to sort of disconnect or escape. And you and I both know, having done mushrooms quite a bit, there's oftentimes nothing all of that sexy about a really high dose mushroom trip. That when you're doing real intentional work with psychedelics, with plant medicines, there's often a lot of challenges within that. There's confrontation. There's a need to look at our shadow and discomfort, right? That these aren't things that are to be done lightly or to be done without reverence and intention, that these are substances that help us to become what I call better leaders, better lovers, and better listeners,
yeah.
Right? And so when we use them intentionally, when we use them skillfully, when we work with a guide or a facilitator who, I mean, you do this quite a bit with folks like Lamar Odom and the Wolf on Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, right? So when we have a guide who can help bring us through this, that can often be one of the most transformative and profound experiences of our lives. So it actually, we don't disconnect, we actually further connect, we further plug into the substrate of existence when we actively and intentionally work with these psychedelic medicines.
That's a great point. And I would say, we have to call out our government right now. Whoever the next president is, when they take office, they're facing a major mental health crisis, addiction crisis. There's nothing, I'm going to make the case for iboga, which is an African root that's known to break even a heroin or an opiate or an alcohol addiction. And we have this thing that we know is capable of disrupting that type of an addiction. There's nothing else. There's no talk therapy. There's no, putting somebody on some drug that's going to do that. So we have this plant medicine that can do it. We really just have to embrace it. And right now, the people that are getting addicted to drugs, it's not because they're weak-minded people. It's actually just they're, having like a pain injury or an operation. They have pain, they take medicine. Then that medicine, they can't get more, so they have to buy it on the street. Now they're addicted to opiates or oxycodone or some kind of fentanyl. And the fact of the matter is, these are like regular people in every family, and we have to have a solution. So if ibogaine is known to be safe, it was sold over the counter in the 1950s by a French company under the brand Lambrine. It's totally been proven safe, and it can break an addiction. Then why aren't we using it? And the answer is, we have had this industrial complex that, didn't want plant medicine to thrive, but post-pandemic and in this moment where there's going to be, I'm projecting a lot higher suicide rates and addictions and things, this is like the moment where you as an individual have to take back your rights. And, the last point I'm going to make on this is that doctors most of them don't even know about nutrition, which could solve 80% of the problems that they're working on. So why would I listen or think they know anything about psychedelics? They don't. So I'm not going to listen to like some, internal medicine doctor in Boca Raton tell me that he doesn't think this is good when Johns Hopkins and other institutions have proven that it's safe and effective. So just violate federal law, I would say, and disregard the medical system until your doctor, if your doctor looks like he's fit and healthy, which is not many of them, that might be a doctor I would listen to. Otherwise, just disregard what the medical establishment's saying.
Well, and I love it. Yeah. Zappy the anarchist. This is why you're here. Tell us about ketamine, because ketamine is legal. It's available now. It's widely accessible. You and I have talked a lot about ketamine. Is ketamine a psychedelic? Is ketamine not a psychedelic? What's your take on ketamine?
Yeah. So ketamine is a psychedelic, but it's a dissociative. So that means basically it's separating your left and your right brain and allowing them to communicate however they want without like your ego getting involved, which is what most people need. And it's really amazing because it's FDA approved. The reason that they found out that ketamine was effective for treating PTSD and addiction and suicidal ideation is that during Vietnam, they were using different drugs in the battlefield and doing amputations. And they were using ketamine, they were using ether, morphine, these things. And after the Vietnam War, they looked back and all the people that had the ketamine anesthetic had not committed suicide at anywhere near the same rates as the other people. So they're like, wow, something's going on here. They brought it to Yale University. They did a big study and they came up with ketamine is 72% effective for treatment-resistant depression that nothing else works for. Low-dose ketamine. So luckily, Paul and I, during the pandemic, we were here in Miami together with some friends, and we did our own experimentation.
We called it a ketamine and meditation together. It was fun. A few times, in fact. Yeah.
And ketamine is like a ketamine-enhanced meditation. And a lot of times, I think, the biggest myth, I think, from, a lot of times the biohacker community, they'll tell you that, you can do it yourself. All you got to do is sit down and meditate and just, think good thoughts and just forget about it. And the reality is that for, people here who have the means and maybe they don't have trauma, yes, they can sit down. But if you just came back from Afghanistan or you were sexually abused and you have real trauma, then, you cannot just probably go sit down and meditate. You need some kind of a pattern interruption to take place. And that's what these God-given plants are all about. And ketamine, even people think ketamine is some chemical made in a lab, but it's not. It's actually, in the same way that LSD, people think that's a chemical made in the lab. They actually derive it from a bacteria that grows on a rye seed, is LSD. And ketamine is made out of some salts and some minerals and processed. And so people say, oh, well, it's processed. I don't want that. And I have to remind them that ayahuasca, the plant medicine, is a root of a plant and a leaf of another plant that the shaman has to brew a tea. So there is intervention. And when you ask the shamans how they knew what plants to mix together to make ayahuasca, they would tell you that the plants told them. And in the same way, ketamine being this, opportunity to enhance your brain, which, we find out Elon Musk has a ketamine treatment twice a month to work on his depression, which I can understand because if everybody in the room is dumber than you and you keep re-explaining everything, it's got to be pretty annoying. And so, not only is he doing it for that, but I think it's up-leveling him to the point where, he's coming up with new physics. They just showed that he got some new AI chips, and it was supposed to take 2 to 3 years to put the whole configuration together, and they did it in 19 days.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can't do that. What's supposed to take 2 or 3 years, you can't do in 19 days unless your brain is evolved and you're leveraging psychedelic medicine.
And I'm glad you brought up Elon, because on the topic of this conference, Plato, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, right? So these ancient thinkers in ancient Greece and ancient Rome also used to participate in something called the Eleusinian Mysteries, right? Where they would drink a beverage called kykeon, which was made from ergot, this fungus that grows on rye, the same thing that LSD is made from. So essentially you had Plato and Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius, and likely Pythagoras, Cicero, a lot of the other influential thinkers and philosophers who were essentially taking LSD in ancient Greece. And in fact, one of the most impactful philosophies is this sense of the soul and the mind being separate, that we have this eternal essence that lives forever, and that the mind is sort of inhabiting this current moment in time. And I believe it was Plato who came up with that concept after working in the Eleusinian Mysteries. So psychedelics were highly influential in something that is the bedrock of Western civilization. And I think it's no coincidence that you have people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and many other highly influential tech people, because LSD also made Silicon Valley. So Ken Kesey was in, experiments at Stanford, working with LSD, snuck it out of the lab, started to give it everywhere in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And so you had all of these early computer engineers, pioneers, technologists who were taking LSD. The guy who invented the computer mouse, the computer screen.
DNA, the guy who...
The DNA helix as well.
Helix,
right? So a lot of these innovations that we now basically have become totally integrated into our lives were because of our use of psychedelics, which is fascinating.
Amazing, yes. And I would say, I personally would not want to die and be at the pearly gates and God's looking at me and God says, like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I died. And then God's like, well, why didn't you do something about it? I go, oh, well, because the guy with the white coat told me not to do it. And God's going to be like, well, what about all the natural things like the mushrooms and stuff that I put there? And I'm going to be like, well, I didn't think I should do it because the guy told me. And then he or she is going to then say, okay, great. You're going back another 10,000 lifetimes. Congratulations.
Would you come back?
I mean, it's a pretty good ride.
It's a pretty good ride. I mean, when you wear glasses like that, Zappy, it's got to be a really good ride. Any other myths that one myth that I thought of was people, psychedelics have become very in vogue the last few years. And so people also think of them as like a magic pill, right? Or a panacea or a silver bullet, that we've been so conditioned into thinking if I just take this drug or if I just take this pill, it'll fix these surface level issues that I'm having, where we know that's not the truth, right? That the reason psychedelics are so powerful is, I mean, they're to my friend Dave Rabin, who presented earlier, they're neurocatalytic, right? They enhance neuroplasticity. They introduce entropy into the brain, and that chaos, that destabilization allows for a repatterning of our thoughts and our patterns and our behaviors. And so much of then the real change is, well, what environment do we step into after that? So you mentioned Ibogaine before, right? Ibogaine is so amazing for opiate addiction and heroin addiction, but those who relapse most are because they go back into the same environment that they were in before they started the Ibogaine. So when we're working with psychedelics, we have this, critical learning period that's opened back up once again. The environment that we go back into is so important, and how we choose to shift that and change that. Do we break up with a toxic partner, right? Do we stop eating that toxic food? Do we stop working in that toxic job, right? What are the things that we are cutting out or eliminating that are keeping us in a frequency that isn't so elevated?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that the kind of final thought I have is that, psychedelics are one of the ultimate great surrenders in life. And so people in life, it gets kind of boring because you kind of know what's going to happen. You have this scanning mechanism that's filtering for danger, and then you start scanning stuff out, and then you kind of know what's going to happen. Before I reach for the glass, I already know I was going to do it. So people, in order to deal with this, they go to a horror movie to try to something happen that they don't know, or they go see a comedy show because the person's going to say something that unexpected, And so life gets boring. And in psychedelics, you actually have to surrender every time to the fact that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And that is like so freeing from somebody living in 2024 that is so deep in the matrix that it just seems like everything is, moving a million miles an hour. So to step back and trust nature, that's kind of my final thought would be trust nature. And, and then lastly, don't take it seriously, because this thing is not totally supposed to be serious. And that's, Alan Watts and all these people have been saying that for years. Don't take this thing seriously. And I love what the Maharishi who taught the Beatles to meditate, he had a great line. And he said, we have the serious responsibility to take nothing serious. And that, I think if we do that, is amazing. And lastly, I want to give a shout out. My guy Andres over here, I film make with, he was saying to me the other day that this is the greatest country in the world, America. He's like, because if you can have a biohacker conference, which is basically taking down the medical establishment and the government control, and you can actually have it in Palm Beach at a convention center, then this is the greatest country in the world right now. And so we have to respect it and, use our intelligence after this pandemic that we have.
Yeah, legalize acid. Those are my final words. Let's get LSD back. Legalize mushrooms. Legalize ibogaine. Legalize ayahuasca. These medicines need to be available for us as adults to work with intentionally, and it's absolutely absurd and ridiculous that they are Schedule I and unavailable to us as American citizens. And I think the beautiful part about living in America, it is a place that changes and can change rapidly. And it's beautiful to see what's going on in Colorado and Oregon, where these have been legalized. Massachusetts is voting on Tuesday to legalize. So we're seeing small steps. And I think we're ready as a culture. We're ready as a people to have widespread access to these incredible molecules.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, I would say, greatest time ever to invest in the psychedelic space. Right now, all the garbage is out. The cream has risen to the top. And this is real science backed by top universities and institutions. And so I would buy a psychedelic ETF today. They have a fund where it's a bunch of companies. And I believe it will create generational wealth for your family, just putting a little bit of money in there right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Shut.